on in, everybody. Grab your coffee. It's never too late for a coffee. Talk about Bill Nye. I haven't watched his show yet. Well, don't let me stop you. Haven't checked out Jordan Peterson yet. Oh, you missed me. So, I did. That's true. As soon as we get 500 people, we'll start talking about Trump's report card. I'm not sure what there is to say about Bill Nye, unless you have something specific. All right, everybody. Well, we're almost at 500. That's kind of fast this time. 5 a.m. wherever you are. 500. There we are. Coffee off. Let's go talk about Donald Trump. Yeah, maybe a little bit about Ann Coulter coming to Berkeley. That's a fun conversation too. I'm sort of ignoring Bill Nye. I don't even know why he's getting so much attention. I mean, other than he's got a TV show. But is there something in particular he's done lately? Maybe there's something I've missed. So I saw that Schumer agrees with Trump about tariffs on Canadian milk. And I thought, I just wanted to give him a nickname like Fake Milk Schumer. Fake Tears Schumer only goes so far. So let's talk about Donald Trump. So I read an article in Politico. If you haven't seen my blog post on that, I posted it a few hours ago. And I was taken by an article in Politico in which the author, and I don't even know who it was, but he was important enough to have an article in Politico. And he said that it's objectively true that Trump is doing poorly in his first 100 days. And I thought to myself, how out of it do you have to be to think that that could even be an objective question? You know, objective compared to what? What is the scientific standard for how this president does in this situation in 2017 in a situation which has never existed before? As I said in my blog, are we comparing President Trump to how well Abraham Lincoln repealed and replaced Obamacare? There's nothing to compare it to. There are no two situations alike. And why do we look at the first 100 days instead of the first, 65 days or the first 111 days? Do you know why? Because 100 is a big round number. Okay, that makes sense. So I made a list of the things that I thought Trump supporters would objectively think that he was doing right, and then I'll talk about the things they did wrong, because people keep saying, oh, you're only talking about the good things, but I'll talk about the bad things as well. So I'll just quickly list the things that did seem to be going right in the first 100 days. Now, if you're measuring by, number of legislative accomplishments, I would think the fewer the better. Do you want your government to do more? I'm not so sure, but so I don't count number of new bills. That doesn't seem like a reasonable way to measure anything. So here are the things that I see that objectively seem to be true. All right, economic confidence is up. The polls say that. That's objective, and we know with certainty that that's good for the economy when optimism is up. We know that Trump signed a bunch of executive orders. Now, you might not like those executive orders, but nobody can argue that that's not activity. It's not a sign of competence, at least in terms of getting done the things that Trump wants to get done, even if you don't want those things done. You see China putting the screws to North Korea in ways it hasn't before. That's different. That's new. That's positive. You saw Trump erase the "I'm a puppet of Putin" rumor that was sort of crippling the country for a while, and he just made that go away by sending all those tomahawks into Syria. Trump has completely erased the Trump is Hitler illusion. And by the way, this was a big frickin' problem for the country. The country had this Hitler is, just became president of the United States. And that was the biggest problem in the country. Like literally the biggest problem in the country, near-term problem. And he solved it. He just gave a speech about the Holocaust today that I think puts that to rest. So that's a pretty big accomplishment. It's just not on anybody's list, right? Because you don't put stuff like that on a list, even though it's huge, given where he started from, right? He got a Supreme Court justice who was very qualified, even if you don't like his politics. He got healthcare moving along from a terrible bill to at least proposals that are far better than what they started with. Now, when things start bad and are rapidly improving, why do we call that a failure? That's sort of exactly what you want. If I were to describe to you a situation in which you started poorly, but you rapidly improved, you'd say, well, that sounds like success to me. And everybody agrees that's what happened. Nobody thinks it's going from worse, to terrible. It's not going from bad to worse. It's moving in the good direction. Tax reform, too slow. But, the Congress is mostly to blame for that, and most people still expect that'll come out well. International relations look fine. The one exception is Russia, and it's the one exception that people want. They want us to not be too cozy with Putin, or at least they want Trump to not be too cozy. So the one exception to international relations going the way we want is the exception we want. We don't want him to be too cozy with Russia. Now, I happen to think that being cozy with Russia is not the worst problem in the world, and I also think that the Russia-United States alleged low point in relationship is pure theater, because in reality, if anything important happened, we would be on the same side, right? It's not like we're fighting over a border or something. But if, let's say, there was a major terror attack, either in Russia or the United States, we're going to be on the same side, right? So now let's look at the things that President Trump allegedly did wrong, all right? So you could criticize what he's done for women's reproductive rights, if that's your position on things, both in terms of the Planned Parenthood funding and in terms of putting Gorsuch on the Supreme Court. But you'd also have to say that what he's really doing is just moving that responsibility down to the states, as our Constitution suggested should be done whenever we can. But the point is that whether you think he did a good job or bad job on those things in the first 100 days, it has to do with your own politics. It doesn't have to do with his effectiveness as an executive, because he's doing the things he said he would do, and he's accomplishing things that he said he would accomplish. So if that's a negative, it's sort of a strange one. You could make a case that President Trump has put economics ahead of the environment. And you could say, well, that's a mistake because the environment, is a bigger priority. But the trouble is, the only way you can make that claim with certainty is to ignore the fact that we all agree is true, that the better the economy, the better your chances of fixing your environment. Because it turns out that poor countries don't have clean water and clean air, unless they have no industry. So what's the net of that? What's the net of a healthy economy that's inventing new technologies and clean coal? Not that there is clean coal, but maybe someday. I know somebody who knows a lot about the nuclear industry and says that in 5 years we'll have fusion. In other words, a clean energy that doesn't have much risk of meltdown, or any risk, I guess. And that problem has been reduced to an engineering problem. Now think about the enormity of what I just said. nuclear fusion, according to somebody who's super smart and very involved and invests in this space, somebody who knows a lot about it, right? And has a deep academic credentials, so it's not a crazy person. And the only reason I'm not naming a name is because I don't like to represent somebody else's opinion in this way. But what he told me is that we're 5 years away from fusion, and that it's an engineering problem now. It's no longer a science problem. They know how to do it. They know the science of it. They just need to engineer it right, which is hard, but we'll get there in the normal course of engineering improvements. So if you imagine that that's the case, a strong economy, along with developing fusion, pretty much takes care of climate change in the long run, right? So long as we don't die in the next 20 years, I guess. I guess there's a risk that the economy is already in some runaway condition, but since we've never been right with any of our forecasts before, I don't know why they'd be right now. All right. People also complained that President Trump reversed a bunch of campaign statements, but he reversed them from things that they thought were impractical to things that sound more reasonable, like going from, hey, NATO is useless, to, oh, okay, NATO has a good use. But it's also because, their focus is more on terrorism. So I think everybody came out ahead on that. People criticized Trump for saying a bunch of stuff that didn't pass the fact-checking. What did all of that stuff have in common? Didn't matter. It's all the unimportant stuff. or it made you just focus on the things he wanted you to focus on. But, nobody was surprised anytime President Trump says something that's, hyperbole or an exaggeration, because they know what he means at this point. There's nobody thinks that when the president states a fact or a statistic that it's necessarily going to pass the fact checking. But the thing you can kind of count on at this point is that none of it's made any difference. He does it with things that just don't make any difference. Okay? And if you could tell me there's an exception to that, I would like to hear it. And there might be. I'm not aware of any. It seems to me that on all the important things, when it matters, he is getting the right answers. When it doesn't matter, like when you're in a campaign, or if it's he doesn't get those things right because they don't matter. Persuasion matters more in those cases than accuracy. We hear that President Trump's staff and his advisors are doing a bunch of infighting and disagreeing and blah, blah, blah. But I'm not sure that's bad. Would you want them all to agree with the boss? Then you've got a sort of a dictator situation, which was literally the thing that his opponents feared the most. The worst possible thing is he gets in office and he's a strong man and, there's nobody disagreeing with him or they feel they can't. So it turns out that's sort of good news. Right? He's been slow to fill some positions in the government, actually lots of positions in the government. But have you noticed any problem because of that? Was the secretary of God knows what supposed to come over and mow your lawn this week and he didn't show up? What exactly is going wrong because we haven't filled in some of those jobs? They couldn't have been that important. Let's be honest, they weren't that important because we haven't noticed, all right? The big ones he filled. And people say he did a pretty good job on the cabinet. Then there was a time that President Trump incorrectly claimed, that he had been wiretapped, or that his staff had been wiretapped in Trump Tower. But it turns out that was totally wrong. It turns out he was not wiretapped. He was legally surveilled in an indirect way, which sounds completely different to wiretapping if you happen to be a Trump critic, and it sounds exactly like wiretapping if you're a Trump supporter. So I'm not sure we can put a grade on that. All right, so here's an interesting observation, which I put to you to test it, right? So some of the things I say, I'm pretty confident that they're absolutely true. But this is not one. This is one I'm going to put out there as a pattern I see, but test this. Look at it yourself. See if you see the pattern. And I'll ask you right here if you see the pattern. The pattern that I think I see with Trump's critics, especially in the first 100 days, is that most of their problems with the Trump administration are imaginary. And they're demonstrably imaginary. And let me just go through the list and see if you disagree with any of this. Now, I'm not saying that he's doing everything right, and I'm not saying that some of the things we imagined would go wrong won't go wrong. I'm not saying that the imagination won't, either by coincidence or by clever insight, match reality at some point. But as of today, it's all imaginary. Let me give you the list. You have the imagined problems that you'll find on his tax returns. Now, I'm not saying that there are no problems on his tax returns. I'm just saying we haven't seen them. So it's sort of an imaginary problem. We sort of imagine that if we had that information, we'd be mad about something. Then there's the imaginary blackmail by Russia. We're not worried about that as much, but it's imaginary, given that there's no evidence, direct evidence of it. There's the imagined poor performance in his first 100 days, and it's imaginary because you're not really comparing it to a legitimate alternative. There was no other president trying to repeal Obamacare in 2017. So if you imagine he did better or worse than the imaginary president who was doing the job, I have to call that imaginary, because you're literally comparing it to your imagination of how it should have gone. Who says your imagination is right? Then there's people who say that he's doing a bad job because he's effectively getting things done that are not the things they want done. But really, that's a political question. It has nothing to do with his executive skill, right? He's just doing things you don't like. There's the imaginary staff problems. Now, keep in mind, there are definitely staff quibbling and staff disagreement. There's certainly some backstabbing going on with the staff. You know all that's true, but that would be true in every administration, right? You put a bunch of people together suddenly and they're going to be jockeying for power and stuff. But we don't see any negative outcome of that. In other words, we're just imagining that this infighting is a problem because we don't see the problem. We're just imagining it. Then there's a problem that, Trump is a crazy person who's going to, put his finger on the nuclear button and destroy the world. Now, what is the evidence that Trump is insane? Well, there's the things he says that aren't true, but as we've talked about them, they're very consistently unimportant things. Or when you think they're untrue, they kind of turn out to be true pretty quickly, right? It's like his wiretapping sounded ridiculous until you found out, oh, wait, they can collect all this stuff, and they did, and, there were extenuating reasons for it, but it wasn't that far off, his claim, right? So there's also the imaginary problems we have because he gets his facts wrong. So we imagine that, oh my God, President Trump is going to say a fact, it's going to be wrong, and next thing you know, there's going to be problems all over the world. But the problem is, everybody expects him to say stuff that isn't exactly accurate. Everybody expects him to put a strong anchor in any negotiation. Everybody expects him to say whatever it takes to persuade people, because that's what he's always done. He does it in front of us. He does it all the time. It's consistent, and it's very safe. So far, meaning we've watched him do it for years, and we've watched him do it a lot in the past year, and all it does is get him what he wanted. It puts our attention where he wants it. He becomes elected president. The Republican Party sweeps the government, controls everything. He's getting all the things he's trying to get. Not as fast as he wants to, but he's heading in the right direction, right? So to think that his facts that don't pass the fact checking, and plenty of them exist, I'm not minimizing any of that, to imagine that they are therefore a source of gigantic problem is to ignore years of history that says they're not, especially when you know that President Trump has a tendency for, let's say, preferring persuasion over accuracy. And as long as all the foreign countries also know that, which they do at this point, nobody gets surprised, right? then you have the problem of he's done things that would be bad for the future climate, but we don't know. We imagine that the things he's doing now will in some way ripple through the universe and cause problems with the climate, but we don't really know. It's kind of imaginary. It might be right. Could be the climate scientist consensus is totally accurate. Could be. It's just we've never seen complicated models of that type be accurate before. Be the first time. But it's possible, right? I mean, for everything that has never worked before, such as human flight, there was a Kitty Hawk. There was a time when, finally they got it right. But you never know where you are, until the Kitty Hawk is in the air and flying. You never know if you're in part of that long period where things have never worked, or in that first day when things worked for the first time. You never know. You can't tell when you're in it. You can only tell after the fact. So that's how I see President Trump's report card. And by the way, you have to answer a question for me in my blog. I'm going to read this blog, and you'll know why. Just this little snippet here. So I started by saying everyone observing politics seems to agree on two things about a president's first 100 days in office. Number one, 100 days is a meaningless arbitrary marker for a president's performance that is more likely to be misleading than useful. And number two, let's treat it like it is important. Let's act like it is important. And then I put the comical Twitter exclamation, I don't even know what that means, but every time I see it on Twitter, I laugh. I think it's just mocking people who are getting too excited about stuff. So those are your grades for Trump's A's and B's. Oh, is it an autistic scream? I did not know that. So that's like a 4chan thing? By the way, one of the funniest phrases I've seen on the internet in years came from 4chan, and when they tracked down Shia LaBeouf's camera, and somebody referred to it as weaponized autism. It's one of the funniest because it's completely accurate. That's why it's funny. Yeah, people are complaining about Trump not draining the swamp. That is correct. But has it mattered yet? I mean, we imagine it matters, but has it mattered? Is there such a thing as autistic screeching? Like from a medical perspective, is there something like that? Oh, there really is. Oh, I didn't know that. So am I going to get angry? Am I going to get am I going to get angry letters from people because I used that in my blog? Oh, that's worth leaving it there just for that. Oh, oh God, that'll be funny. Can anyone say things would be better? So let me, I like to say lots of things that are construed as Trump positive because they mostly are. So let me say something that's a little more balanced. So you saw the ABC Washington Post poll probably that said that if people had to vote today, Trump would actually come out better than he did in the actual election against Clinton. So people take from that that people are warming up to Trump and they have regrets, or not regrets, but they're glad they didn't vote for Clinton or they wish they hadn't, something like that. But I think that analysis, it's sort of the easy one, and it's the first thing that it looks like. But I think it's completely wrong, because I'm pretty sure that you could take anybody who just became president in their first 100 days and run that poll against the person who lost, and probably the person who got the job would start looking better just no matter what, right? It's just one of the benefits of the office, because the office brings with it its own power, right? The office of the presidency. So you put somebody in there who isn't liked, and it just makes them more likable. you know, there's nothing you can do about that. So I think had the situation been reversed, and I know you don't want to hear this, but had the situation been reversed and Clinton had won, and they did that same poll now, ABC Washington Post poll, they said, who would you vote for today? I think Clinton would have picked up speed because she would have been in office doing presidential stuff. No, people are irrational. The fact that Trump was picking up support after going into office has everything to do with the fact that he went into office. It has nothing to do with his performance. I mean, he could have messed it up with doing something just so outlandishly horrible that nobody could recover. But just having the job is such an advantage, you'd expect the polls to go that way. Do you have any criticisms of Trump? Well, I listed the first 100 days criticisms. The criticisms that I could make, let's say I were in a debate and somebody said, all right, your side of the debate is to say that Trump did a bad job, so make your case. I would do what his critics are doing. I would artificially put goals on him, like, oh, he didn't get health care the first try. And I'd say, that's a failure. But that would be a goal-oriented way of looking at things, when in fact he's a systems player. And by a systems player, I mean that everything he does improves his odds for the next thing he does. So that's the dynamic you want to look for. And failing at the first attempt at healthcare did make the next attempt more likely to succeed because they figured out what wasn't going to work. Some people who thought they could get away with the first version got some humility. So if you view it as a goal, he's failing all over the place because there are things you think he should have done or things he said he was going to do in the first 100 years and didn't reach them. But if you look at it as a system where you're really just trying to persuade things in the right direction and improve the odds over time, bring yourself from a place of bad possibilities to better possibilities, all of that is working. Name anything that's moving in the wrong direction right now. That's a serious question, by the way. Name something that's moving in the wrong direction right now. Let's say first 100 days. The immigration is down 70%. We could talk about free speech in a minute. Name anything ban and out. That's not a headline, is it? North Korea? No, North Korea is going well. Because, North Korea is going well. So seriously, even if you're a Trump supporter, name something that isn't trending in the right direction right now. Healthcare? No, healthcare is trending in the right direction. It's just not done. It went from a terrible idea that failed hard to one that everybody says is much closer to something that might get the wall. The wall isn't trending bad. It's just not going to happen as quickly as some people want. It's trending in the right direction. The Antifa, well, that's the special case, is that Trump's haters are pretty strong. But if you look at the polls, it doesn't look like they're heading in the right direction. It looks like Trump is converting people. Let me throw out the dumbest idea in the world, the idea that will never happen. So I'm gonna frame this by saying this is the most genius idea that will never happen. Simple to implement, like one phone call basically, and you could get it done, probably. Um, President Trump could meet privately with North Korea's leader, Kim Jong-un. He can invite him. Think about it. Not even to have political conversation. He could imagine, just wrap your head around this, right? Keep in mind that Kim Jong-un wants, power, safety, authority. He wants prestige, and having the president meet with him would give him everything he wants. Now imagine Trump and Kim Jong-un in the same room, just sort of hanging out for a day, just doing whatever is fun, just golfing or some damn thing. I don't know if the North Korean leader golfs. Yeah, because Dennis Rodman got along well with Kim Jong-un, and by the way, he could go there too, and maybe he could set up the meet, have the three of them to go there. It's hard for me to believe they wouldn't have a good time. Because in one weird way, they're kind of the same guy in a different culture, right? Kim Jong-un is holding his country together primarily with persuasion. Now you could say that he's using, violent force, but that is for persuasion, right? And everything he says about being a god king and they're going to destroy the U.S. in 10 minutes and all that stuff is all persuasion, right? It's all stuff that won't pass the fact checking. So it seems to me, and by the way, you got really quiet when I suggested this, it seems to me that the safest thing the world could ever experience would be President Trump having a personal meeting, in some, either in the United States or in some safe place, third party, maybe in, I don't know, wherever is a safe place, Switzerland or something, and just hanging out for a day. Because first of all, I think they both think the other one is crazy, right? Don't you think that both of them think the other one is crazy? And I'll tell you, if Kim Jong-un is crazy, I haven't seen it yet. All right? I'm looking for crazy. Everybody says he's crazy, but I'm not seeing crazy. I'm seeing a guy who doesn't have a lot of tools, because North Korea doesn't have, every tool in the toolbox, but the ones they're using seem to be keeping keeping his regime in place. And what the hell is he going to do? Surrender? Kill himself? Have everybody kill his family, his kids? Unfortunately, Kim Jong-un can't really make nice because it would be hard to hold his country together and hold his power. So he needs the United States to be the evil enemy that binds them all together. But he doesn't look crazy. Scary, yes. Crazy? Probably not. All right, so here's a question for the historians. And I believe that I'm not going to make this as a historical claim, so I'm asking you to check this for me. So it's a hypothesis based on my lack of knowledge of history. But let's say in the last 50 years, how many countries have had a war when the leaders of those countries, the current leaders at the time, had a personal in-face meeting? All right, that's the question. So those of you who know more about history, how many countries have started a war after their leaders have had an in-person, personal conversation? And I know I got a lot of Bush and Saddam. Is that true? Bush met Saddam in person? I said last 50 years, so I was specifically excluding Hitler. Palestinians? No, the Palestinians have always been at war with Israel. So I'm saying, in what situation did they meet before war as personal, in person, and then went to war anyway? India, China, 1962. That wasn't a proper war. So you think Bush and Saddam, Rumsfeld and Saddam, is there any evidence that Bush and Saddam met? Just Rumsfeld. So Daddy Bush and Saddam. Now keep in mind that Saddam didn't declare war with the United States, and in fact he was trying to avoid it. So you have sort of, I don't know if this is the exception that proves the rule or this is just a special case. But in the case where Saddam had met Bush Sr., Saddam did not start a direct war with the United States, nor did we start a direct war with him until he attacked, someone that he thought he could get away with attacking. So that was more a miscalculation, wouldn't you say? Did Hillary ever meet Gaddafi? Well, she wasn't president either. Before, when he was CIA chief. Ah, okay. Because here's my hypothesis that I'm working on. If you say to me, Scott, you're the president of the United States now, what are you going to do about this other country that wants to go to war with you? As long as I'm treating that other country sort of like a concept, I can say, oh yes, in this situation we go to war. But the moment I personally know the leader who probably will die in this war, it becomes sort of different. It just seems to me that it seems to me that when two leaders meet, their odds of having a war just drop to practically nothing. And it's because it's hard to start a war over somebody you've met, like somebody you've actually met in person. You stood in the room, you had a drink with them or whatever, you played a little golf with them, and then you attack their country. It's just hard to do. You'd assume Putin met the presidents of, yeah. Were those really wars, per se? Yeah, I think the exceptions you would need to make are where there are countries who have had some kind of long animosity that went across leaders. Yeah, interpersonal relationships, they can matter. But the reason that I thought it would be humorous, albeit impractical, for Trump and Kim Jong-un to meet is that they could both see that they're not crazy. And I think they'd actually sort of get along. I do. Why was a Dilbert cartoon in a CIA WikiLeaks file? I don't think it was. If it was, send me a link. Trump's on TV now. Oh, Reagan and Noriega. Did they meet in person? Yeah, that's possible. Could be. Yeah, Kim did kill his own family, but you also don't know if they had it coming. Because I imagine that the way you get a promotion in that country is to, kill your father or your cousin. All right, so there are some examples, it sounds like, of leaders who met and then ended up going to war anyway. But in those cases, did they meet personally? Like, did they hang out? Or did they just meet at an event? That would be different. My shirt is inside out. Made me look. All right, I'm going to get off of this because people will see that the Periscope's too long and then they won't want to watch it because it's too long, even though I'm rambling all over the place. We'll talk about other stuff at other times. Yeah, my YouTube studio is still not working. but I need some time to work on that. Then I'll get it going. Then I'll do the writing lesson. I've got my graphics all ready for that, so we're almost ready to go. I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.